Good morning. Today I will present about my research methodology. The title is the Trump administration's impact on dealing with climate change, and my research questions is the how the U.S. dealing climate change with Paris Agreement under the Trump administration. And the background. Climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment in time. The impacts of climate change are global in scope and unprecedented in scale, from shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding. Without drastic action today, it will be more difficult and more expensive to adapt to these impacts in the future. The World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, and the United Nations Environment Forum at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, to provide an objective source of scientific information. The IPCC released a special report in October 2018 on the effects of the 1.5 Celsius degrees global warming, stating that reducing global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees would entail drastic, far-reaching, and unparalleled improvements in all aspects of society. The report found that reducing global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees compared to 2 Celsius degrees could go hand in hand with creating a more stable and equitable society with clear benefits for humans and natural ecosystems. And the importance for choosing this topic is because the environmental issues are one of the important issues in the international relations beside international security issues and also the global economy. Environmental issues are very important to be discussed in a forum because it cannot be denied that if a tragedy or disaster occurs in area of the country, it will have an impact on neighboring countries. And for the RRL an independent variable, the IV is the Paris Agreement, the theoretical literature. Inside the journal by Charlotte Schreck and Moritz van Anger, the Paris Agreement aims to hold global temperatures well below 2 Celsius degrees above pre-industrial level and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 Celsius degrees. This goes beyond what had been agreed in Copenhagen and confirmed in Cancun, namely to recognize the scientific view that the increase in global temperature should be below 2 degrees Celsius, and while parties could not agree on a specific date at which global emissions have to have to peak, the agreement states that such a peak must be reached as soon as possible and that rapid reductions must follow so as to achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of this century. And for the empirical literature is the Inside the Book by Judith Blau, and the title is The Paris Agreement, Climate Change, Solidarity and Human Rights, stated that in the less than a year after the adoption of the Paris Agreement on November 2016, it became an international treaty. In fact, a treaty with unprecedented international support. Just to note again, the COP22 conference in Marrakesh began just 2 days later, on November 6. The cause of global warming is primarily carbon dioxide, or CO2, which makes up most of the greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere, warming the earth and oceans. Carbon dioxide is byproduct of the burning fossil fuels, primarily coal, oil, and natural gas, which is thrown in the atmosphere as these are burned. It is not as if carbon dioxide somehow disappears. On the contrary, it remains in the atmosphere for a very long time, leaving traces up to 1,000 years. And for the dependent variable, VDV is the US dealing climate change under the Trump administration. For the theoretical literature is the Inside the Journal by Richard Pavone stated that the election of the Republican Donald J. Trump as the US president created discomfort amongst environmentalists. Indeed, the US president, as well as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, Scott Pruitt, are climate change skeptics and adhere to the position of the climate change counter movement that denies the linkage between global warming and human activities, opposing the dominant anthropogenic global warming position. Trump's attitude towards climate change is already quite clear. It is not a priority of the US foreign policy, and domestic environmental policy must not burden the US economy and domestic jobs in an undue manner, for instance, through higher electricity prices and higher taxes. Actually, he considers the environmental regulations adopted by the former administration as being excessive and also being the main cause of the job losses in the coal mining and oil and gas industries. And for the both independent and dependent variable for the theoretical literature is from the journal by Bob Ward and Alex Bowen stated that Trump administration's decisions to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement concludes that it would not affect the development of low-carbon technologies, but long-term goals and international cooperation on climate change will be affected by budget cuts in American climate change research and the cancellation of donations from the Multilateral Environmental Fund of the US. Other researchers have been more pessimistic, suggesting that the United States withdrawal would increase the cost of the other countries' mitigation efforts. Buchanan and Van de Graaff also argued that withdrawal would not lead to a significant rise in domestic emissions or weaken support by other countries for the Paris Agreement, but could have an adverse effect on the flow of climate finance. And for the empirical literature is the journal by Chang Yong Xiangxia, Xiaoqing Chena, and Cheng Chiu Hong. Guang Lei also stated that the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement was expected. During the early stages of the US election, Trump had claimed several times that climate change is a hoax. As a publicity stunt, he promised to withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement. Once he took the office of the president, Trump proposed the America First Energy Plan, which he intends to re-stimulate the US fossil energy industry. Furthermore, he completely dismantled the climate change policies made by the former US President Obama. Trump canceled the Clean Power Plan and issued the executive order on promoting energy independence economic growth. He drastically cut the federal budget on climate change policies and research. He also appointed anti-climate change officials to highly. And for the theoretical framework, the first one is the conceptual diagram. The independent variable is the Paris Agreement in dealing climate change, and also the dependent variable is the US in dealing climate change that can affect multilateralism. And both independent variable and dependent variable is the US national interest and Paris Agreement towards climate change. Climate change. Climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at the defining moment in time. The impact of climate change are global in scope, unprecedented in scale. From shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding. Without drastic action today, it will become difficult, more expensive to adapt to these impacts in the future. The World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, and the United Nations Environment formed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, to provide an objective source of scientific information. And for the operational definition is the climate change refers to a significant change in global temperature, precipitation, wind patterns, and other measures of climate that occur several decades or longer. The seas are rising, the foods we eat and take for granted are threatened, oceans acidification is increasing. And for the multilateral relations, is the multilateral diplomacy is the management of international relations by negotiations among three or more states through diplomatic or governmental representatives, but it can also be engaged by representatives of non-state actors. Multilateral negotiation is characterized by multi-parties, multi-issues, multi-roles, and multi-values by Muldon G. And for the operational definition is the consensus would only be reached in 2015 when a renewed, partially legally binding treaty, the Paris Climate Agreement, committing all parties to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius was finally signed. It came into force in November 2016, described in many political, public, and academic contexts as a diplomatic success. The agreement suffers, however, from several limitations to its effectiveness by Pereira G. And for the relations between IV and DV, US withdrawal from Paris Agreement will affect multilateralism among countries that have signed the agreement. And the scope and limitation of study is because no other country has initiated withdrawal from the Paris Agreement 3 years after President Trump announced his intention to do so. However, there is a risk that other countries will be motivated to reduce their climate actions as well, and it remains to be seen if the US withdrawal will lead to a reduction in commitment on the part of other states when drafting their potential INDCs. And for the methodology that I use for the research is the qualitative research. Qualitative research is the to understand ideas, thoughts, or perceptions, and also qualitative research entails gathering and evaluating non-numerical data such as the text, video, or audio. It can be used to learn more about a problem or to come up with the new research ideas. And also, official statements, journals, newspaper, ebooks, and news will all be used to gather information. And also, I will obtain this information from the official or similar website. And that's it. Thank you.